What happens when a lifetime of prejudice collides with undeniable power at 40,000 feet? This isn't just a story about a misunderstanding. It's about a man who, in the face of quiet bigotry, held a multi-million-dollar truth in his hands. A flight attendant on an exclusive private jet saw a black man in a simple tracksuit and decided he was the staff. She couldn't have known she was speaking to Julian Vance, the tech billionaire, who didn't just charter the plane, he had the title deed in his briefcase. Stay tuned to witness the moment a condescending whisper turned into a career-ending earthquake. The air at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey doesn't smell like the commercial terminals at JFK or Newark. It's a cleaner, sharper scent, a sterile cocktail of high-octane jet fuel, expensive leather, and the crisp, cold currency of time. This is where the world's 1%ers don't wait in lines. They glide through private lounges where the water is Voss, the coffee is single origin, and the silence is the most valuable commodity. On this brisk Tuesday morning, Julian Vance was an island of calm in this sea of quiet urgency. Dressed in a tailored charcoal grey Loro Piana tracksuit and a pair of pristine yet understated common project sneakers, he didn't radiate wealth in the way a hedge fund manager in a pinstripe suit did. His wealth was quieter, more profound. It was in the relaxed set of his shoulders, the easy way he held his phone, and the complete absence of any need to impress. At 38, Julian was the founder and CEO of Nexus Flow, an AI-driven logistics firm that had revolutionized global shipping. He was, to put it mildly, fantastically, almost absurdly rich. But he still carried the humility of his upbringing in Compton, a place where dreams were often paved over by harsh realities. He was waiting for his mentee, Leo Martinez, a brilliant 22-year-old from the Bronx, whom Julian was grooming to lead a new division of his company. They were flying to a tech conference in Austin, and for the occasion, Julian was taking the maiden voyage of his new jet, a Gulfstream G700, the pinnacle of private aviation, fresh from the factory. He'd named her the Voyager. A polished attendant from the FBO fixed-base operator approached him. "Mr. Vance, your aircraft is prepared. The crew is ready for you on the tarmac." Julian nodded, a small, appreciative smile on his face. "Thank you." He walked through the glass doors onto the expansive concrete apron. The G700 stood gleaming under the morning sun, its pearlescent white paint shimmering a single sharp obsidian stripe running down its fuselage. It was a masterpiece of engineering and design. At the base of the stairs stood the flight crew. Captain David Miller, a veteran pilot with silver hair and a reassuringly steady demeanor, greeted him first. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Vance. She's a beauty. Flew her in from Savannah yesterday, and she handles like a dream." Captain Miller said his respect for Julian genuine and long-standing. Miller had been flying for Julian for 6 years. "Glad to hear it, David," Julian replied, shaking his hand warmly. Next was the co-pilot, a professional young man who nodded respectfully. And then there was the flight attendant. She was the very picture of high-end service, tall with sharp features, ice-blonde hair, pulled into a severe chignon, and a uniform so perfectly pressed it looked like it was made of porcelain. Her name tag read, Victoria. Her smile, however, didn't quite reach her cold, calculating blue eyes. As she looked at Julian, her professionally neutral expression flickered for a nanosecond. It was a micro-expression of appraisal followed by dismissal. Julian, who had navigated countless boardrooms filled with thinly veiled condescension, recognized it instantly. It was the look that sized him up and filed him away based on the color of his skin and his casual attire, not the content of his character or the depth of his pockets. As Leo arrived, looking slightly flustered but excited, Victoria's professional veneer slipped further. Leo, wearing a hoodie and carrying a backpack, looked even less like the stereotypical private jet client. Victoria addressed Captain Miller, but her eyes were darting toward Julian and Leo. "Captain, are all the passengers here? I need to coordinate with the catering and ground staff before we close the doors." "The passengers are here, Victoria." Miller said, his tone perfectly even, but with a subtle emphasis that a perceptive person would have caught. "This is Mr. Vance and his guest, Mr. Martinez." Victoria's smile tightened. She turned to Julian, her voice a saccharine purr that dripped with false deference. "Of course. Welcome aboard." She then looked past him towards the empty lounge. "Are we expecting the owner to arrive shortly?" The question hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. The implication was clear. You couldn't possibly be the owner. Captain Miller's jaw tightened. Leo looked confused, sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. Julian's face remained a mask of placid calm. He had faced this his entire life. The security guard tailing him in a luxury store, the valet who handed him the keys to someone else's minivan, the executive who assumed he was there to fix the AV system. It was a familiar, wearying dance. "The owner is here," Julian said, his voice soft but resonant, carrying the weight of 1,000 similar moments. Victoria blinked a flicker of confusion in her eyes before it was replaced by a stubborn certainty. She clearly thought he was being cryptic, perhaps a personal assistant playing games. She gave a small, condescending laugh. "Oh, okay," she said, her tone implying he was being difficult. She then turned her back to him slightly and addressed Leo as if he were the more senior of the two. "If you could let me know when your boss is on board, I'd appreciate it. We're on a tight schedule." She then did something that turned the quiet insult into a direct command. She gestured toward the galley at the front of the plane, a space typically reserved for crew. "The staff usually places their personal items up front," she said, looking directly at Julian. "It keeps the main cabin clear for the passengers." The tarmac fell silent. Captain Miller looked horrified. Leo's jaw dropped as the meaning of her words finally crashed down on him. The world for a moment seemed to shrink to the space between Julian Vance and this woman who, in her starched uniform and blinding ignorance, had just tried to put a billionaire in his place. Julian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply held her gaze, a profound disappointment settling in his eyes, and said 2 words that would signal the beginning of the end for her. "Is that so?" Victoria Davenport believed in a world of clear, unshakable hierarchies. In her mind, the universe had an order, and her job within the exclusive bubble of private aviation was to service the top of that pyramid. She was an expert at reading people, or so she thought. She could spot a new money tech bro from a mile away by his garish watch, an old money air, by the subtle fraying on his bespoke suit cuffs. Her entire worldview was a finely tuned algorithm of prejudice designed to categorize and serve accordingly. Julian Vance broke her algorithm. He didn't fit, a black man in a tracksuit, on a brand new G700. Her mind processed the data and spat out the only conclusion it could compute: he was an employee, a personal trainer maybe, an assistant, a musician's hype man, certainly not the principal. His quiet "is that so" was a pebble of defiance in the smooth pond of her authority. She interpreted it not as a warning, but as insolence. She decided to assert control. "Yes, it is," she replied, her voice losing its faux sweetness and gaining a crisp managerial edge. "We need to maintain a standard of service. The cabin is for the client." She gestured again, more insistently this time toward the galley. "Your bag, please." Captain Miller stepped forward, his face a thundercloud. "Victoria, that's enough. Mr. Vance." Julian subtly raised a hand, stopping the captain. He wanted to see this through. He wanted to understand the depth of the delusion he was facing. It was no longer just an insult. It was a fascinating, horrifying case study. The client, Julian repeated his voice, still unnervingly calm. He looked around the immaculate cabin, his gaze sweeping over the hand-stitched Italian leather seats, the polished burl wood, the bespoke silk carpeting. And who, in your professional opinion, is the client today? Victoria's patience snapped. This was insubordination. I don't have time for games. I have the manifest right here. I'm expecting Mr. Sterling's party. Now, are you going to stow your gear, or am I going to have to speak to your employer? The name hit Captain Miller like a physical blow. Richard Sterling, the notoriously difficult CEO of Aerolux Elite, the charter management company Julian had hired to staff and operate the Voyager. They were technically Julian's employees, and Victoria, in her spectacular ignorance, was threatening to report the owner of the plane to the CEO of the company he paid millions to. Leo, who had been frozen in shock, finally found his voice. "Lady, you have no idea who you're talking to," he stammered. Victoria shot him a withering glare. "And you are?" "He's Mr. Vance's guest," Julian answered for him, his focus unwavering from Victoria. "And he is welcome anywhere on this aircraft. As am I." He took a step into the cabin, deliberately walking past the galley and into the main seating area. He ran a hand over the smooth leather of the seat he had personally selected months ago. He had spent hours with the designers from Gulfstream, agonizing over every detail, from the thread count of the linens in the stateroom to the specific type of crystal for the glassware. This plane was more than a vehicle. It was the culmination of a lifelong dream, a testament to a journey that began with nothing. And this woman was treating him like a trespasser in his own home. Victoria, seeing his defiance, crossed her arms. Her face was a mask of righteous indignation. "Sir, I am the lead flight attendant on this aircraft. My authority in this cabin is final for the safety and comfort of our passengers. If you continue to disregard my instructions, I will have you removed from the plane." It was an astonishing escalation. To threaten to remove a man from his own jet. Captain Miller looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. He grabbed his radio, his voice low and urgent. "Teterboro ground, this is Golf 700 November Victor. Hold our taxi clearance. We have a situation." Julian, meanwhile, just watched her. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were observing a play. The anger was there, a cold, hard knot in his stomach, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of weariness. This was the tax he paid for his success. This was the invisible barrier that wealth alone could not break. He walked slowly toward the cockpit door where a small, leather-bound portfolio sat in a designated slot. It contained the aircraft's essential documents: registration, airworthiness certificate insurance, and the bill of sale. "You mentioned a Mr. Sterling," Julian said, his back to her. "You work for his company, Aerolux Elite, correct?" "That's right." Victoria said, her tone triumphant, as if she had finally backed him into a corner. "And believe me, Mr. Sterling does not tolerate unprofessionalism from his vendor's staff." Julian turned around the leather portfolio in his hands. He didn't open it. He simply held it. "Let me tell you a story, Victoria," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate conversational level that was more chilling than any shout. "When I was a kid, my dad was a mechanic for United at LAX. He worked double shifts, his hands permanently stained with grease, just to keep our family afloat. He loved planes. He used to tell me that in the sky, everyone is equal. There are no neighborhoods, no red lines, just skill machinery and the grace of God." He took a step closer. Victoria held her ground, but a flicker of uncertainty finally entered her eyes. "He taught me to respect the people who make things go," Julian continued. The mechanics, the ground crew, the pilots, the flight attendants. Everyone has a role. Everyone deserves dignity. You seem to have a very clear idea of everyone's role. So tell me what is yours. I am responsible for the client's experience, she said, her voice a little less certain now. And my experience, Julian said, placing a soft but firm emphasis on the word my, has been quite memorable so far. You've mistaken me for staff. You've tried to sequester me to the galley, and you've threatened to have me removed from an asset I purchased 3 months ago for $78 million. He paused, letting the number hang in the air like the scent of ozone after a lightning strike. Victoria's face began to crumble. The smug certainty drained away, replaced by a pale, dawning horror. The color left her cheeks. It was as if her entire operating system was crashing, unable to process the new reality-shattering data. "No," she whispered. That's not possible." Julian finally opened the portfolio. He didn't need to search. He knew exactly where the document was. He pulled out a single crisp sheet of paper. "It is possible," he said, his voice devoid of malice, but heavy with the weight of absolute truth. "This is the FAA registration certificate. Let me read you the name under Registered Owner. It says Vance Julian T." He held it out for her to see. The document in Julian's hand was not just a piece of paper. It was a fulcrum, and on it, Victoria Davenport's entire world was tilting on its axis. The bold black letters spelling out his name seemed to vibrate with a terrible energy. Vance Julian T., Registered Owner. Her mind reeled frantically, trying to reconcile the image of the man in the tracksuit with the staggering reality of the words on the page. $78 million. Owner. The dissonance was a physical shock, a jolt that left her breathless. The carefully constructed walls of her worldview, built on a foundation of prejudice and assumption, were not just cracking. They were being pulverized into dust. Her carefully maintained composure shattered. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish out of water. The professional mask melted away, revealing a raw, panicked terror underneath. This wasn't a simple mistake. This was a cataclysm, a career-ending, life-altering 5-alarm fire of a mistake. Captain Miller, who had been listening in stony silence, finally spoke his voice, carrying the calm, absolute authority of a man in command. "Victoria, you are relieved of your duties for this flight. Please gather your personal belongings. Ground security will escort you back to the FBO." The words seemed to hit her harder than the revelation itself. "Relieved, Captain?" "No, please. It was a misunderstanding." Her voice was a desperate, cracking plea. She turned to Julian, her eyes wide with a frantic appeal. "Mr. Vance, I am so sorry. I had no idea. I made a terrible, terrible mistake. Please." The apology was a torrent of words, but they were hollow. It wasn't an apology for the prejudice, for the insult, for the condescension. It was an apology born of pure, undiluted fear. She was sorry she got caught. She was sorry she had aimed her bigotry at a man who held her fate in his hands. Julian listened, his expression unreadable. He felt no triumph, no vindictive pleasure. Just a deep, profound exhaustion. He had wanted to enjoy this day, the first flight on his new plane, with his promising young protégé. He wanted to feel the thrill of takeoff, the quiet satisfaction of seeing his hard work manifest as this incredible machine. Instead, he was here dealing with the same tired, ugly prejudice that had shadowed him his whole life, just wrapped in a more expensive package. A misunderstanding. Julian finally said, his voice quiet but cutting. "No, I think you understood perfectly. You saw a black man and a young Latino man, and you put us in a box. The box you keep for the help." The mistake wasn't your understanding, it was the fact that your box was wrong. Leo, who had been watching with a mixture of anger and awe, finally stepped forward. She was treating you like garbage, he said, his voice trembling with a righteous anger that Julian himself had suppressed. She deserved to be called out. Victoria flinched as if struck. She looked back at Julian, tears now welling in her eyes. They were tears of self-pity, not remorse. Please, sir. My job. This is my whole life. I have a mortgage. You have consequences. Julian interrupted his voice, firm but not cruel. Actions have consequences, Victoria. Dignity is not a perk for your preferred clientele. It's a baseline requirement for human interaction. You failed that test. He turned to Captain Miller. David, please handle this. I'd like to be in the air as soon as possible. Leo and I have a conference to get to. With that, he walked further into the cabin and sat down, turning his gaze to the window, a clear dismissal. The conversation was over. Captain Miller nodded grimly. Yes, sir. He spoke into his radio again, his voice clipped and professional. Ground, we need a crew car and security at our position. We're making a last-minute crew change. The next 10 minutes were a blur of excruciatingly awkward silence. Victoria stood frozen for a moment before scrambling toward the galley, her movements clumsy and panicked. She gathered her handbag and a small suitcase, her hands shaking so violently she could barely work the latch. She avoided looking at anyone. The shame radiating from her was a palpable force in the confined space of the cabin. 2 uniformed security officers from the FBO appeared at the door. They were discreet and professional, but their presence amplified the humiliation tenfold. "Ma'am," one of them said softly. Victoria nodded her face, pale and streaked with tears. As she walked toward the exit, she cast one last pleading look at Julian. He didn't turn. He just kept looking out the window at the endless blue sky, a sky he owned, a small piece of a sky that was supposed to be a place of freedom. The heavy door of the G700 clicked shut, the sound final and absolute. Inside, the silence that followed was heavy. Leo sat down opposite Julian. "Man, that was insane. Are you okay?" Julian finally turned from the window, a wry, tired smile on his face. "I'm fine, Leo. Just another Tuesday." But it wasn't just another Tuesday. What Julian didn't know was that Leo, a digital native who instinctively documented everything, had discreetly started recording on his phone the moment Victoria had threatened to have them removed. He had captured her condescending tone, her dismissal, and Julian's calm, methodical dismantling of her prejudice, culminating in the presentation of the ownership papers. He hadn't done it out of malice, but out of a sense of disbelief, a need to capture the sheer injustice of the moment. And in his pocket sat a digital file that was about to turn a private humiliation into a global firestorm. The hard karma for Victoria Davenport was only just beginning. The flight to Austin was smooth, a stark contrast to the storm that had preceded it. A replacement flight attendant, a flustered but deeply professional woman named Claire, had been rushed to the aircraft. She was nervous, overly apologetic, and treated Julian with a reverence bordering on worship, which he found almost as uncomfortable as Victoria's condescension. Julian tried to put the incident behind him, focusing on prepping Leo for their presentation. But the encounter had left a bitter aftertaste. It was a stark reminder that no matter how high he climbed, some people would only ever see the color of his skin. He felt a familiar anger, but it was muted, overshadowed by a deep, resonant sadness for the state of things. "You know the craziest part," Leo said, breaking the silence as they cruised at 45,000 feet. She was so sure of herself, so absolutely certain that she was right and you were wrong. That's how prejudice works, Julian said, looking out at the cloudscape. It's a fortress of certainty, built on a foundation of ignorance. People don't just believe it, they feel it in their bones. And when you challenge it, they react like you're trying to saw off their leg. Leo hesitated for a moment, then pulled out his phone. I kind of recorded it, Julian. The last part of it. When she was threatening you. Julian turned to look at him, his eyebrows raised. You did what? I'm sorry, I couldn't believe it was happening. I don't know what I thought. Maybe that you'd need proof or something, Leo said, looking ashamed. I can delete it right now. Julian considered it. His instinct was for privacy. He loathed public drama and had carefully cultivated a low-profile existence despite his immense wealth. He didn't want his name dragged into a viral spectacle. But then he thought about Victoria. He thought about the countless others like her, operating with impunity in their little fiefdoms of privilege. Don't delete it, Julian said slowly. But don't do anything with it. Let's just sit on it for now. By the time they landed in Austin, an email was waiting for him. It was from Richard Sterling, the CEO of Aerolux Elite. It was a masterpiece of corporate damage control filled with phrases like deeply regrettable incident, isolated event, not representative of our values, and immediate and decisive action. It informed Julian that Victoria Davenport had been terminated effective immediately. It also offered him a full year of management fees, waived a gesture worth well over $1 million. Sterling ended the email by personally requesting a phone call emphasizing his desire to make this right and ensure Mr. Vance's continued confidence in their services. Julian read the email and felt nothing. It was predictable. A problem arose, a sacrifice was made, and money was thrown at it to make it disappear. Victoria was a symptom. Sterling and the culture he fostered were the disease. Julian decided not to reply immediately. The news, however, was already traveling through the tight-knit world of private aviation. Captain Miller had been required to file a formal incident report. The story of the flight attendant who tried to kick a billionaire off his own jet was too juicy to stay contained. Within hours, aviation bloggers and luxury travel forums were buzzing with anonymous whispers. Victoria Davenport, meanwhile, was in freefall. She had been unceremoniously dropped at the Teterboro FBO, her access keycard deactivated, before she even reached the parking lot. The termination call from Aerolux HR was brutal and brief. She was a liability. She was gone. She went home to her meticulously decorated suburban New Jersey condo, the life she had built on the generous salary and perks of serving the ultra-rich, and fell apart. But her despair quickly curdled into a bitter defensive rage. It wasn't her fault, she told herself. How was she supposed to know he didn't look like an owner? He was trying to trap her. It was a setup. She was the victim here. She called a friend another flight attendant, and vented her story painting herself as a dedicated professional who was being unfairly punished for a simple mistake, a victim of the new woke culture where everything was about race. That friend told another friend, and the story, now twisted into a self-serving narrative of victimhood, began to spread. 2 days later, while Julian and Leo were receiving a standing ovation for their presentation in Austin, the situation exploded. A low-level Aerolux employee, sympathetic to Victoria's version of events and disgruntled with the company, leaked the official incident report to a notorious right-wing news outlet. The headline was incendiary: "Woke billionaire has flight attendant, fired for simple mistake." The article framed Julian as an arrogant, thin-skinned tycoon, and Victoria as the hapless victim. It conveniently omitted the details of her condescension, her refusal to listen to the captain, and her attempt to physically segregate Julian to the galley. The story was designed to provoke outrage, and it succeeded. A storm of vitriol erupted online, directed squarely at Julian Vance. His social media, though rarely used, was flooded with hateful comments. He was a race baiter, an entitled jerk, a bully. Sitting in his hotel suite in Austin, watching this narrative spin wildly out of control, Julian felt a cold fury he hadn't allowed himself to feel on the plane. They weren't just defending her, they were attacking him, assassinating his character to justify her prejudice. Leo was pacing the room livid. "This is insane, they're lying. They're turning you into the bad guy." He held up his phone. Julian, this video proves what really happened. We have to release it." Julian looked at the screen at the hateful comments scrolling by. His desire for privacy was now in direct conflict with the need for truth. They had started a war of narratives, and right now he was losing. "You're right," Julian said, his voice hard as steel. "They want a storm. Let's give them a hurricane." He looked at Leo. "Send the video to Sarah Jenkins." Sarah Jenkins was a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist for the New York Times, known for her deep, unflinching exposés on corporate malfeasance and social injustice. If you gave Sarah Jenkins a thread, she wouldn't just pull it, she'd unravel the entire garment. The ripple effect was about to become a tsunami. Sarah Jenkins received the video file on a Thursday evening. She knew of Julian Vance by reputation, a brilliant but reclusive tech mogul, often lauded for his philanthropic work in STEM education for underprivileged communities. The anonymous tip accompanying the video simply stating, "The truth about Aerolux Flight 700 NVA piqued her interest." She watched the 90-second clip. She watched it again, and a third time. It was damning. The audio was crystal clear, Victoria's voice dripping with dismissive authority, Julian's calm, methodical questioning, the final devastating reveal of the ownership papers. It was a masterclass in prejudice meeting power. Jenkins knew instantly that the woke billionaire narrative being peddled by fringe media wasn't just a distortion. It was a deliberate, malicious lie. This was a real story. She began to dig. Her first call was to Richard Sterling, the CEO of Aerolux Elite. Sterling, a slick, perpetually tanned executive who had inherited the company from his father, was deep in damage control mode. He had hoped the story would die down a brief flare-up on the conservative media circuit. He was betting on Julian Vance's desire for privacy. The news that Sarah Jenkins was on the story sent a spear of ice through his chest. "Sarah, good to hear from you," he began, his voice oozing a practiced charm that didn't fool her for a second. "Look, this whole situation has been blown completely out of proportion. We had a staff member who made an unfortunate error in judgment. We took immediate and decisive action. For us, the case is closed." "Is it Richard?" Jenkins's voice was placid, a journalist's poker face. "Because I have a video of the incident. A video where Ms. Davenport threatens to remove Mr. Vance from his own aircraft after ordering him to the galley like a member of the catering staff. That sounds less like an error in judgment and more like blatant racism." There was a choked silence on the other end of the line. "A video that's an outrageous violation of privacy." "The video is the least of your problems," Jenkins continued, her tone hardening. "My real question is about company culture. I'm curious if Ms. Davenport's error is as isolated as you claim. Sterling's bluster was a poorly constructed dam, and Jenkins's questions were the first cracks. He denied everything, of course. He spoke of Aerolux's commitment to diversity, their rigorous training programs, their zero-tolerance policy. It was a well-rehearsed symphony of corporate platitudes. Jenkins listened patiently, then hung up and got to work. She put out feelers to her network of sources in the aviation industry. Within 48 hours, her inbox was flooded. It turned out that Victoria Davenport was not an anomaly. She was a feature. Jenkins heard from a dozen former and current Aerolux employees, pilots, mechanics, and other flight attendants. They all told a similar story. They spoke of a toxic, two-tiered culture actively fostered by Sterling. Clients who were white male and from old money families were treated like gods. But clients of color women and those from new money tech or entertainment backgrounds were often treated with suspicion and quiet contempt. They were frequently subjected to extra security screenings. Their requests were often misheard or delayed, and they were spoken about dismissively among the senior crew, who, like Victoria, had been with the company for years. Jenkins discovered 3 separate instances where wealthy black clients had filed confidential complaints about Victoria Davenport's behavior. One, a famous hip-hop artist, complained that she had refused to serve his guests, claiming they were a security risk. Another, a female tech CEO, reported that Victoria had questioned her credentials and demanded to speak to her husband or a male superior. In all 3 cases, Richard Sterling had personally intervened. The complaints were buried, the clients were offered flight credits, and Victoria was given a quiet talking to, but faced no formal disciplinary action. She was one of his longest-serving, most loyal employees. She was protected. The story was no longer about a single flight attendant. It was about a systemic rot at the heart of one of the world's most exclusive charter companies. While Jenkins was building her case, the video Leo had recorded leaked. It's unclear how perhaps one of Jenkins's sources shared it, or it was passed along from the Aerolux insider, but it detonated online. It first appeared on Twitter, posted by an influential aviation journalist, and spread like wildfire. The public reaction was instantaneous and overwhelming. Seeing the raw footage, hearing the actual words, completely flipped the narrative. The woke billionaire angle collapsed under the crushing weight of reality. The hashtag #NotAeroluxShame began trending globally. Celebrities, athletes, and CEOs, many of them Aerolux clients, began posting messages of support for Julian Vance and condemning the company. Rapper K-Dash, the very artist whose complaint Sterling had buried years ago, posted a scathing tweet. Not surprised at all. Aerolux treated me and my team like criminals for years. Glad someone finally caught them on camera. Pulling my contract. Aerolux shame. The financial fallout was immediate. On Monday morning, Aerolux Elite's parent company, a publicly traded luxury holdings group, saw its stock price plummet. It dropped 15% in the first hour of trading, wiping out nearly $500 million in market value. The phones at Aerolux's booking office were either silent or ringing with clients, cancelling multi-million-dollar contracts. Richard Sterling, barricaded in his corner office, was in a full-blown panic. He had underestimated Julian Vance. He had underestimated the power of a single video. He had underestimated the rottenness of his own company. In a desperate last-ditch effort, he decided to go on the offensive. He agreed to a live interview on a major financial news network, intending to paint Julian Vance as a corporate raider, trying to destroy his company. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. It was the moment that karma, which had been circling patiently, decided to land. The television studio lights were hot and unforgiving, mirroring the glare of public scrutiny fixed on Richard Sterling. He sat opposite, a famously sharp-witted anchor, his face a mask of practiced sincerity, a stark contrast to the panic roiling in his gut. His strategy was simple: deflect, deny, and attack. "Richard, your company is in free fall." The anchor began forgoing any pleasantries. "Stock is down 22%. Your most high-profile clients are leaving in droves. What do you say to the accusations of a systemic racist culture at Aerolux Elite?" Sterling launched into his pre-rehearsed speech. "This is a targeted, malicious attack on a family business that has prided itself on excellence for over 40 years. We had one employee who made a regrettable mistake, and we dealt with it. This has been orchestrated by Mr. Vance, a competitor in the logistics space, to damage our brand for his own gain." The anchor raised an eyebrow. "Orchestrated. I'm holding a copy of an article published this morning by Sarah Jenkins of the New York Times. In it, 3 former clients and 15 former employees allege a pattern of discriminatory behavior, specifically naming Victoria Davenport and claiming you personally buried their complaints. Are they all part of this orchestration?" Sterling's face paled. He hadn't seen the article yet. It had dropped online just moments before he went on air. He was flying blind. I haven't seen that report," he stammered, "but I can assure you any complaints are handled with the utmost seriousness. We have a pristine record." "A pristine record?" The anchor countered her voice like flint. Ms. Jenkins quotes from an internal settlement with music producer Antoine Phillips, also known as K-Dash, from 2019. It seems Ms. Davenport refused to allow his Grammy-winning guest, a black woman, into the main cabin, calling her entourage. The settlement included a non-disclosure agreement. Is that what you call a pristine record, Mr. Sterling paying people to be silent about the racism within your company? The interview collapsed. Sterling became flustered, belligerent, and contradictory. He looked exactly like what he was, a guilty man caught in a web of his own lies. By the time the segment ended, he had done more damage to his company's reputation than the video itself. The board of directors of Aerolux's parent company, watching in horror from their respective offices, convened an emergency meeting before he was even out of the studio. The karma for Victoria Davenport was also accelerating. The global notoriety was absolute. Her name and face were everywhere. She was no longer a victim in a niche media story. She was the international face of entitled prejudice. She lost her friends in the industry, who now treated her like a pariah. The Condo Association started proceedings against her for the unwanted media attention she brought to their building. She was forced to delete her social media, change her phone number, and effectively become a recluse. The career she had built her identity around was not just over. It was radioactive. No luxury brand, no airline, no charter company would ever hire her again. Her name was now a verb in the service industry. Don't pull a Davenport. 2 days after his disastrous television appearance, Richard Sterling was forced to resign as CEO of Aerolux Elite. The company announced a complete top-down overhaul, a new board, and a mandatory company-wide diversity and sensitivity audit. It was a corporate bloodletting, but the brand was likely damaged beyond repair. Throughout all of this, Julian Vance remained silent. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't grant an interview. He let the facts, the video, and Sarah Jenkins's reporting speak for themselves. He and Leo finished their work in Austin and flew back to New York, this time on a commercial flight by Julian's choice. He needed the anonymity, the normalcy. Back in his Manhattan office overlooking Central Park, Julian watched the fallout. He took no joy in the destruction of Aerolux or the public shaming of Victoria and Sterling. It all felt like such a monumental waste. A waste of talent, a waste of resources, a waste of human potential, all sacrificed at the altar of bigotry. He thought back to his father, the mechanic with grease-stained hands, who believed the sky was a place of equality. He had been wrong. The sky was just as infected with the prejudices of the ground as anywhere else. An idea began to form in his mind. It started as a question. What if he could do more than just expose the problem? What if he could help build the solution? He called his CFO and his head of philanthropy. "Clear my schedule for the rest of the week," he said, his voice filled with a new energy, a new purpose. "I want to start a new foundation. I have a name for it. We're going to call it the Voyager Initiative." He wasn't just going to be a passenger in a world that judged him. He was going to be the pilot of a new direction. The storm passed, as all storms do, but the landscape it left behind was irrevocably altered. In the weeks that followed, Richard Sterling's resignation and the public implosion of Aerolux elite Julian Vance found himself in a strange, reflective quiet. The world wanted to hear from him. News networks offered him prime-time specials. Magazines wanted him for their covers. He was being hailed as a hero, a symbol of grace under pressure, a champion against corporate bigotry. He politely declined every single request. He had no interest in a victory lap. The victory felt hollow, the vanquished foes too small, too pathetic to warrant celebration. The rot they represented, however, was immense. He spent his evenings in his Manhattan penthouse, not looking at the glittering city lights below, but at a faded photograph on his desk. It was of his father, young and proud, in his United Airlines mechanic's uniform, standing in front of the massive engine of a Boeing 747. He remembered the smell of grease and coffee on his dad's clothes, and the boundless optimism in his voice when he spoke of the sky. "Up there, son," he'd say, "it doesn't matter where you're from. All that matters is where you're going." The incident on his own jet had proven that simple, beautiful idea tragically wrong. The ground, with all its ugly prejudices, had reached up and poisoned his sky. He could sue, he could rage, he could take the $1 million settlement from Aerolux and forget the whole thing. But none of that would fix the core problem. It would be like treating a symptom while the disease festered. One afternoon, he called an emergency meeting with the board of his philanthropic foundation. The room was filled with sharp, accomplished people, lawyers, financiers, and community organizers who managed his charitable giving with brisk efficiency. They expected him to announce a new grant for a STEM program or a coding boot camp. Instead, he walked to the whiteboard and wrote 2 words: the Voyager Initiative. The incident on my plane wasn't about one ignorant woman. Julian began his voice, calm, but imbued with a new steel-edged purpose. It was a spotlight on a systemic failure. The luxury sector, particularly private aviation, operates in a bubble of extreme privilege, and like any isolated ecosystem, it has become resistant to change. It cultivates a specific look, a specific background, a specific attitude. And anyone who doesn't fit that mold is treated as an outsider, an employee, or a threat. He paused, letting his words sink in. We can't just punish the offenders. We have to change the system that creates them. I'm pledging an initial $100 million to found a new independent organization. Its mission will be to tear down the barriers to entry in this industry and rebuild its culture from the inside out. For the next hour, he laid out his vision. It was audacious. A flight school program that wouldn't just offer scholarships, but would provide holistic support, mentorship, etiquette training, financial literacy, and networking to kids from Compton, the Bronx, Detroit, and rural Appalachia, and a corporate consulting arm that would be less of a gentle advisor and more of a surgical tool, using data and direct, uncomfortable engagement to force companies to confront their own biases. There was a moment of stunned silence when he finished. Then Eleanor Vance, no relation, his foundation's formidable chairwoman, a woman who had known him since he was a teenager, coding in a garage, spoke up. "Julian, this is personal," she said, her voice gentle but probing. The board will support you, of course. But you need to be sure. Are you running toward something new, or are you running away from the anger you're entitled to feel? Julian looked back at the photo of his father. I'm not running, Eleanor, he said softly. I'm finally steering toward my true north. My father believed the sky was for everyone. I'm just going to make sure he was right. The launch of the Voyager initiative, 3 months later, was a masterfully executed event. It was held in a private hangar at Westchester County Airport, with his G700, the Voyager, serving as a gleaming, powerful backdrop. Julian, standing at a simple lectern, finally broke his silence. He told his story not with anger or bitterness, but with the calm precision of a diagnostician outlining a disease. He never once mentioned Victoria Davenport's name. She was a symptom, not the cause. He spoke of invisible taxes and unspoken rules, of the assumptions people make in the blink of an eye, and of the immense untapped potential sitting in neighborhoods that the privileged class only ever flies over. The speech was a sensation. It was raw, honest, and profoundly challenging. It reframed the narrative from a simple story of karma into a national conversation about access privilege and the true meaning of meritocracy. The first class of Voyager scholars was selected that spring. Among them was a young woman named Maria Sanchez from the Bronx. The daughter of a livery cab driver, she had spent her childhood watching the jets descend into LaGuardia, memorizing their tail fins and dreaming of being in the cockpit. She had the grades, the aptitude, and a fiery determination, but her path to a flight academy was blocked by a wall of insurmountable cost. The initiative didn't just give her a scholarship, it gave her a future. Another scholar was David Chen, a quiet, brilliant kid from Oakland. He had built his first drone from scavenged parts and taught himself to code in 3 different languages by watching online tutorials. His passion was avionics, the complex electronic systems that are the nervous system of modern aircraft. For him, the initiative was a gateway to a world he had only ever been able to observe from a distance. Julian met them personally on their orientation day. He brought them into the hangar to see the Voyager. As Maria stepped onto the plush carpet of the G700, she ran a hand over the cool leather of a passenger seat, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Tears welled in her eyes. I've only ever seen these from the outside, she whispered. Julian smiled. This isn't a museum piece, Maria. It's a tool. It's your classroom now. You belong here just as much as I do. Simultaneously, the initiative's consulting arm began its work. Its first engagement was with Gulfstream. Julian himself led the initial sessions with their senior executive team. In a sterile, glass-walled boardroom, he stood before the powerful men and women who built the world's most sophisticated jets. Your machines are perfect, he told them, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Oh, they are marvels of engineering. But you're not just selling machines. You're selling an experience, a world. And that world feels exclusionary to a growing segment of your clientele. My experience began with your product, but it was defined by the culture of the people operating it. We need to fix that culture. The conversations were difficult. There was defensiveness denial. One vice president insisted, "We can't be responsible for how a third-party charter company staffs its planes." Julian met his gaze. You can't control it, but you can influence it. You can set the standard. You can create a Gulfstream certified standard of inclusive service. You can make it a condition of your fleet management partnerships. You have the power to lead the entire industry. The question is, do you have the will? It was a turning point. They began to listen. The initiative's team went to work auditing everything, from marketing materials that overwhelmingly featured white families to the lack of diversity in their senior pilot ranks. The process was painful, but transformative. Gulfstream became a genuine partner, a testament to the fact that change was possible. 6 months after that terrible day on the Teterboro tarmac, Julian was flying to the National Business Aviation Association conference in Orlando. But he wasn't alone. His guests were the top 10 scholars from the initiative's inaugural class, including Maria and David. The atmosphere on the plane was electric. It was the opposite of the heavy, toxic silence that had filled this cabin on its maiden voyage. This flight was filled with laughter, with rapid-fire questions, with the bubbling energy of dreams taking flight. As they cruised at 45,000 feet, David Chen, who had been quiet for most of the trip, approached Julian with his laptop. "Mr. Vance," he said nervously. I was looking at the flight plan data you gave us. I think I wrote an algorithm that can optimize the climb profile to save about 4% on fuel burn, depending on atmospheric conditions." Julian looked at the lines of code, then at the projected data. It was brilliant, elegant, something professional analysts would have taken months to develop. "David," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "This is incredible. This isn't just a theory. This is a real-world solution." Later, as the sun began to set, painting the clouds in fiery shades of orange and pink, Maria came and sat in the seat opposite him. She looked out the window, mesmerized. "I used to think guys like you were from another planet," she said without looking at him. "Like you were born into this. I never thought." She trailed off. "I wasn't," Julian said quietly. "My first flight was in the back of a 737 middle seat. I was 21. I stared out the window for 6 straight hours. I felt like I was breaking the rules, like I wasn't supposed to be up there." She finally turned to look at him, her eyes searching his. "Do you still feel like that sometimes?" Julian considered the question. He thought of Victoria's sneer, of Sterling's bluster, of the legions of people who had underestimated him his entire life. But then he looked around the cabin at the faces of these brilliant, hungry, deserving kids. He saw not just their future, but his own finally in focus. The anger he had felt was gone, burned away, and replaced by the clean, bright heat of purpose. The karma he had delivered wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of creation. "No," he said, and the truth of the word resonated deep in his soul. "Not anymore. This is our sky now." In the end, this story isn't just about the epic takedown of a prejudiced flight attendant and a corrupt company. It's a powerful reminder that the truest form of karma, the hardest and most lasting form of justice, isn't just about tearing down the old, it's about building the new. Julian Vance could have stopped at revenge, but he chose revolution instead. He transformed a moment of personal humiliation into a movement of systemic change, creating opportunities for countless others to follow in his flight path. If you believe that true strength is turning adversity into advancement, and if you were inspired by this story of quiet dignity, overcoming loud ignorance, then please help us share this message. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of justice, karma, and the incredible power of the human spirit. Let us know in the comments what you think is the most powerful form of karma.